In this video, we'll discuss the following points and take a closer look at 5-point perspective and how to draw with it to create some pretty wacky views of our designs. Make sure you spend 1 hour a day practicing the things you learn here until you can do them all. The link for this course's Anki deck is in the description, as well as a link to our Discord server so that you can help test if this is an effective way to learn these skills compared to more traditional approaches. This seems for some to be the holy grail of perspective drawing and represents the pinnacle of drawing skill, but as you'll hopefully see from this video, it's actually not that hard to do. I'm not trying to cheapen it by telling you this, it does still take skill, but 5-point perspective is actually easier to manage because it's so distorted. That means we can get away with quite a lot of errors and still make our drawing feel correct. There is no cone of vision when dealing with 5-point, and we can pretty much place the vanishing points wherever we want as long as they are aligned correctly. We can slide them along the horizon line or center line of our vision, and this will be what ultimately creates the final distorted effect. Let's go back to New York and pretend we are back in that street scene with a box on the floor in front of us. We've seen that in 1-point perspective, we have this Z vanishing point firing straight to our eyes as if a laser beam was shooting at us from some point way off on the horizon line. When we jumped into 2 and 3-point perspective, we saw that while we could still add 1-point aligned objects to the scene, generally we used vanishing points for X and Z that were at different spots on the horizon line. That is, not directly on our center line of vision. Well, for 5-point, this vanishing point makes a dramatic comeback, and we once again use this 1-point perspective framework to manage things going back into the distance. That means the first thing you have to wrap your brain around here is that everything in the scene will project backwards. Its depth will go towards this point once again, and that's exactly the same as you saw for 1-point perspective. Z goes this way. So what about X and Y? Well, now these vanishing points are set up as opposing pairs in the drawing. Let's look at X first. X1 will be off to the left, and X2 will be off to the right, and both will sit on the horizon line. We'll make them equal distances from point Z for now. The way these work is new, so you'll need to pay attention. Anything to the left of our center line, heading off to the left, will aim for this point, and anything to the right will aim for the point over to that side. The thing is, this doesn't happen using straight lines in the ways that we've seen so far, and this is where the confusion seems to come in for a lot of people. These lines now actually curve from left to right, and the reason for this is related to the cone of vision and the fisheye effect that wide-angle lenses create. We've seen in previous videos that the vanishing points are typically off the page, and that if we try and squeeze them onto the page, we get this weird fisheye effect occurring. Another way to consider this is that we are squeezing the vanishing points onto the page here that would normally be off to our side, outside our peripheral vision in real life. This would be like somehow bulging your eyes out of your skull to see the stuff literally to your left and right, at the same time as being able to look ahead. It is possible to draw like this, and you see lots of famous artists draw from life using this perspective framework. They are looking ahead, but kind of scanning their peripheral vision without moving their heads and trying to include the things that they can see. And these things distort because you're seeing the flattened out view of this on paper, whereas in reality the measurement plane we are seeing here curves around us. If we wanted to, we could still use the measurement sticks to map out the initial flat square in front of us here, but it wouldn't be square. The corners would bulge and curve as they move towards the X points. But X is not the only direction this curvature takes place in. We also have points Y1 and Y2 now, sitting above and below the horizon line. You'll hopefully recall that when we looked at 3-point, we could look up or down. And as we do this, the lines need to aim for a spot above the horizon line when we look up, and below the horizon line when we look down. Well, here we're able to see both above and below the horizon line at the same time. Once again, because we're somehow bulging our eyes out of our heads to see the spots both directly above our heads and directly below our feet, at the same time as looking dead ahead with a fixed head position. You can see that with everything in place, the entire grid has fisheyed and been drawn onto a bubble. Everything we draw in X and Y follows these curved grid lines, and anything receding into the Z direction aims for that one original vanishing point. This is actually closer to the way we see the world than 3-point perspective when we consider our peripheral vision and how that works. But the convergence is way less than I am using here because these vanishing points for X and Y are always very far off to our sides, as well as very far above and below us. Because the lines for X and Y curve in their respective directions, this can be best thought of as drawing on the surface of a sphere, and every single line will suffer some form of distortion as a result, even if it appears flat. All the eye-level stuff we've looked at so far is also still in play, but if we place something like a figure or box in the scene, you'll see it wrap or distort, and everything will suffer from more distortion the further it strays from our eye level and our center line of vision. The skyscrapers will therefore distort a lot because they go very far up into the sky, whereas the lower parts may suffer less distortion because they're closer to our eye level. It's possible to draw out grids for 5-point, but once again, I rarely bother. As hard as it seems, you need to build up an intuition for how 5-point works, and you can do this from tracing over distorted images, as well as using any of the tools that we'll discuss later on. We place these vanishing points equidistant from point Z, but we can actually move them different amounts, and this will change the outcome of the drawing. For example, we could bring in the upper and lower points for Y and squash them together to really amp up the distortion, but only for vertical lines in the scene. We could also perhaps bring in the bottom point and right one, and this will distort things in the bottom right corner, but the other side will be the same as we've seen previously. I tend to just treat the cross made up by the horizon line and center line as a sort of measurement plane, and I just divide every section up into thirds here. We can then create a sort of 5-point Brewer grid. It takes a little while to appreciate how this is working, but once you understand it, it actually becomes possible to draw pretty much anything you want and aim for these points in space, the same as we have seen for the other frameworks. And the distortion actually means you can get away with lines that are not as perfect because there are no longer any straight lines here. The closer a line is to either our horizon line or the center line of our vision, the straighter it will be. The lines on these points would be perfectly straight, although in reality they are curves. It's just we're seeing them as straight lines because they are perfectly aligned to us. The further a line moves towards the X or Y vanishing points, then the more it bellies out and distorts. This box in the upper right corner is an interesting one. It's so far in the upper right that we can only see the bottom side and the left side that faces us. The front face is completely bellied away from us, and that's because in our real life everyday world view, this box would pretty much be in line with us and to our upper right. We've just drawn it as if our eyes were bulging out, somehow being able to see it within a huge cone of vision. The key thing to notice is that anything in the upper right corner shows us its left and bottom face, so it's kind of like drawing the opposite sides. This throws up a new issue though. The grids and construction lines you use now all need to be curved, and much like how you spent time practicing Brewer grids with straight lines, now you need to be able to do them with curved lines. You need to appreciate how the convergence affects the degree of curve at any point on the line relative to your eye level and the center line, and how this is like drawing on the surface of a bubble, and how the surface of the bubble changes as you move the vanishing points. We can even Dutch the view and draw the horizon line at some crazy angle, and then draw the scene from this new viewpoint. Pretty much anything goes here now, and you can create all sorts of weird and wonderful views. But remember, ask yourself, is this appropriate for what you're trying to depict? One final thing to note is that the further away something is, the less it may distort. This right side box is further away from us. It's not as curved as the box which is a little closer to us, but at the same distance to the left. No thing I've drawn here is perfect, I'm sure, but it doesn't matter too much because there's so much distortion that I can get away with making a lot of mistakes. Some of you may be wondering why we jumped from 3-point to 5-point and whether there is a 4-point perspective framework. Well, there is, but to be honest, nobody really uses it. There is also a 6-point framework. I won't be covering these systems, but if you want to learn them, be my guest. The reason I'm saying this is because when you're drawing, remember, you need to pick the best view to express the idea or design that you're creating. This is the first question you need to ask yourself, and I bet you will never answer with 6-point or 4-point. It will most often be 3-point, but 5-point has its uses too. One point that Scott Robertson brings up in his book How to Draw is that many people use computer renders to trace over. And there is a huge catch to doing this now, which is another reason I dislike it. And the catch is, it's physically incorrect. If we stood at the top of a building and looked out across the horizon, then what we would see would be closer to 5-point perspective. If we actually make the vanishing points a little more realistic by having them off the page, the parts of the buildings that are above our eye level would converge a little towards the high Y point, and the parts below us would converge a little to the lower Y point. The convergence in Y would only be slight, but it would be occurring. Note how this is the same type of distortion we've been looking at, but really subtle now. And I've probably still overdone it here a little actually. This is caused by the fact that we have, for example, on the vertical line, a vanishing point both above and below the horizon line. When you use a 3D modeling program, it can't always easily consider this distortion and will actually make everything converge to a single Y point, much like we see when we use 3-point perspective. And this is fine when we're looking up or down from a more extreme angle, but if we're looking more ahead, the computer will actually generate a view that looks wrong. It cannot handle a vanishing point above and below the horizon line at the same time. It can only handle them going to one point, like this. The curved lines are straight, aiming for only one vanishing point. Remember, you need to use your intuition. Does this look like reality? It's actually amazing how often you see this broken and clearly wrong distortion in professional concept art out in the real world where they've drawn over a 3D model. The views are incorrect, and these views should be in 5-point perspective. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. To help you gain intuition for drawing in 5-point, you should trace over fisheye photography. You can also buy grids that are set up in 5-point and draw over those. There is one more tool I used to use when I was learning this to help me, and it's called Lazy Nezumi. It's a paid add-on for Photoshop, and it comes with a variety of lock-on guides for drawing things like waves and arcs and perspective frameworks. You can actually use it to set up a locked-in 5-point system on the canvas, and then any lines you draw will conform to the 5-point grid. The neat thing about this is that the grid is not visible. You can just draw the box or anything else you want, and it will magically appear as if in 5-point perspective. You are still responsible for getting the proportions correct, but it can be a great way to draw scenery and environments very quickly in 5-point, and it has a 3-point perspective mode as well. It does take a little getting used to, but you might get on better with it than I did. This is it, the final test. Can you draw the 5 primitives in 5-point perspective? Can you change the vanishing points to create specific desired outcomes with distortion occurring more in certain areas of the scene than others? Can you appreciate how the straight lines we drew up until now have all been replaced by curved lines that conform to the surface of a bubble? So to recap, you learned that 5-point is a bit more complex to set up, but actually a bit more forgiving to use in some ways. That our peripheral vision works much more like 5-point as a generalization, so we can use it to make those cool fisheye drawings that other artists do. That the position of the vanishing points can be adjusted to make different fisheye effects, and that computers can fail us when drawing 5-point, so be careful if you trace a 3D model. Make sure you can do the following before moving on to the next video. To make the challenge easier, once again, use the tools mentioned or trace over grids. Can you use a grid to make the room you are in right now in 5-point? One more thing to consider here is that 5-point only works when something takes up most of your field of vision. Trying to draw a little object on the table in 5-point will not be possible unless you give it only a tiny bit of convergence or make it take up the whole page. Drawing it with a lot of distortion but small on the page will just make it feel like a zoomed out view. This is because we understand as humans that these views are generally experienced when things take up all of the space we can see in front of us. To make the challenge harder, see if you can aim for the 5 points with no guidelines now, or as few as possible. Can you create imagined scenes in 5-point perspective and get all the curvature feeling correct? You should still ask yourself if what you have looks correct, but you'll be able to get away with far more here than you normally would in the other frameworks. That's actually pretty much all I have left to say about perspective drawing. I have now shared with you all of my notes that I made during my time studying it, and if you can do everything mentioned in the series so far, then you can do all the things I can, and probably better than I can as well. The last thing to cover then is how you can use these tools to actually go on to study the things you probably really want to use to draw with them, like vehicles or anatomy. So in the final video, I do a couple of slowed down demos to show you how I use these techniques to make my own drawings. Keep practicing, and remember there is an Anki deck available for free that recaps this lesson and schedules the practice for you. If you want people to practice with, I recommend joining this channel's Discord server, the world's biggest art learning experiment where you can ask questions, get more challenges, and reinforce your learning amongst friends.